When you were young, you dreamed about it. As you grew older, you started to put the pieces together and began making the things of your dreams a reality. We know you because we are you.
We dream of a future
where people and countries communicate
and act on global matters together.
We dream of extending humanity to the moon and other worlds.
And ensuring its safety back home.
And as we put the pieces together,
we have stretched out our arms
and lent a helping hand.
Gave humanity the eyes and ears.
To predict events and changes
that might threaten us or our planet.
We gave the world a platform
to communicate and collaborate
as one.
As one.
as one.
Through passion and innovation,
we have pushed ourselves further
and further.
Learning, iterating, and progressing.
And we are just getting started.
how far can we go?
How far can you go?
How far can you go?
because without people like you,
it would still be just a dream.
Good evening, everybody, or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are around the world. Welcome to Space Place Canada. My name is Kirsten Vanstone, and I am a director on the Space Place Canada board. I'm also chair of the events committee and a space nerd, and I will be your host for this evening. We're delighted that you're joining us tonight. Space Place is a multidisciplinary group of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and arts. That's STEAM professionals. Our leadership team includes scientific researchers from astronomy and earth sciences, from engineering. We also have non-governmental agency and academic administrators and planetarium, museum, and tourism development people. Space Place has supporters, including members and active volunteers from all these fields and more, and over 8,000 contacts from around the globe who share our goal to create a 21st century virtual planetarium for Canada and the world, as well as an accessible educational website about space and astronomy, and most importantly, a physical Space Place planetarium for Toronto. Now, the pandemic has, as it has for many of us, slowed us down a little bit, but we did begin hosting virtual events late last year, and this is our 4th public event. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Space Place. So I'm going to show you some pictures, which means I have to figure out how to share my screen here. Here we go. Oh, there we are. Okay, so Space Place has some kind of exciting news. In fact, we have just received our official charitable status. That means that if you want to get involved with Space Place, there are lots of ways to do it. We actually have a membership program. If you're interested, members are active volunteers with Space Place, people who might join our board or a committee. If you'd like to find out more about membership, you can send an email to info@spaceplacecanada, that's one word, .ca. If you don't think you want to commit that kind of time but would still like to support our project, you can. How you can do that is by becoming a supporter and sending us some cash, which we need to help run our events and all of our operations. So I have a little proposition for you. If you want to support us with some cash, if you can give us a $50 donation, now we can actually give you a tax credit or tax receipt for that for Canadian tax purposes. We can also give you some swag. We have a planetarium music download card. What's really interesting is that music that you can download with that card is actually original compositions that were made for the McLaughlin Planetarium here in Toronto, including music by rather well-known Hollywood composer Michael Dana. You can also get what is, we hope to soon be, souvenir of the past Space Place Canada face mask. For a $100 donation, we can give you all of that and add an autographed book by Canada's own Bob McDonald. That's an Earthling's Guide to Outer Space, which we can send to you anywhere in Canada. We would like you to do this by going to our website, spaceplacecanada.ca, and click donate by PayPal. Please ensure that you include your email address so we know how to contact you, so we can send you all of your stuff. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this evening, Stradia, who has helped build our website and web presence, Global Public Affairs, who's helping us connect with everybody, and of course, MDA. Okay. We're going to learn more about MDA a little bit later. Okay, here we go. Let me stop sharing. So tonight we are going to be exploring a really interesting thing, something that's a little bit new for me, being a space nerd. In the previous events, we've explored Canada's history and future in space. And in May, we met two young Canadian space companies, Kepler Communications and GHGSat. Today, we're exploring the increased interest in space from the financial world. Space used to be the exclusive realm of governments who drove projects often by contracting out with private aerospace and engineering firms. But in the last decade or so, the industry has really changed, and sometimes very publicly. The new space race has just this month reached an almost fever pitch. A lot of speculation about who will actually be the first to fly in space. Is it going to be Branson? It's going to be Bezos. So we can have a little vote on that later on if you want. In its usual way, Canada is not going about this in quite the same brash way, but don't be fooled. There is a lot happening in this country. So please join us as we explore this new frontier and discuss how private investment works alongside the government to boost Canadian space-based projects. So I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening. I'm going to start by introducing Andrew Lapham, who is off my screen. Here we go. Andrew co-founded Northern Private Capital in 2018 to invest in innovative companies that use technology to disrupt industries, solve big problems, and improve the world at large. Then we have Nathan de Ruyter, who is the Managing Director of Euroconsult Canada. He's advised a wide range of Canadian and international clients, including satellite operators, manufacturers, government agencies, private equity, and financial institutions, among others. And then we have Pat Nihil, who is here, Vice President Strategy at MDA. This is, MDA is, of course, Canada's largest, and I would venture to say best known space company. And there he focuses on identifying, developing, and executing strategic business development initiatives, including evaluating investment and helping customers secure capital for their satellite missions. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. So are we ready to dive in? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Nathan, I wanted to start with you just to give us an overview of your perspective on the increase of private financing coming into the space sector. So since your company is a little more global focused, can you tell us what's going on out there in the world and how Canada compares?
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten, and thank you for inviting us today to be here. Definitely a fascinating topic. So Euroconsult, people probably know, but we are a consulting firm really focused on the satellite sector, space sector. We've really been in business for over 30 years, but over the last 10 years, you really see this tremendous change and the rapid kind of change in how business is done, how technology is developed, but also one of the key fundamental drivers, the influx of private capital. So if, there's a number of companies that are tracking the kind of, equity investment being poured into the space sector. And I just looked at it prior to this call, and it's pretty fascinating. If you look at 2012, there was about $10 billion private equity invested in space. Today, we're already above 187 billion in cumulative equity investment. So you can really see, over the last less than 10 years even, there's this tremendous influx of new capital. And I think, that definitely, we'll talk a little bit more, I think, in more detail, why and how and so on. But I think, one of the key things is that we're seeing is because of this kind of new investment becoming in place, and you see as well, a wider variety of different type of investments. It's really moving, space as a sector from, let's say, a niche market to much more mainstream. And I think that's definitely a positive thing, and it's definitely what we would expect to continue to happen. And yeah, that's something that not only the global world will benefit, but also Canadians, companies can benefit. And definitely think we should talk a little bit about it today. I think if you look at the different kind of growth vectors in the space segment and the space sector, there's definitely Canadian companies, or high-profile Canadian companies, that are positioned to really kind of benefit and grow with this kind of new space economy that is developing as we speak today. So generally, I think there's a bright future for space. There's a bright future for Canadians. Definitely, space is an international global context, so it's a very competitive environment as well. But where we are today, I think Canada can definitely make a mark on the international landscape. And let's talk about it more a little bit later.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nathan. Now, MDA, as I said, is probably for us space nerds the best known of the Canadian companies, had various names over the past little while. But Pat, what's your perspective on this thing, considering what MDA has been through recently? I'm sure you have some things to say.
Sure. Well, I appreciate being on this panel. This is a very exciting topic, especially now. Most people know MDA as being a, iconic provider of technology, space technology. We've built the Canadarm for the shuttle and the International Space Station, built subsystems for more than 300 communication satellites, delivered, turnkey satellite missions for Sapphire, Rapid Eye, the RadarSat Constellation mission, and RadarSat 1 and RadarSat 2. These are all huge technical achievements. This helped us establish a reputation as a trusted partner that can deliver. But we're more than that. We see ourselves as a mission maker. And what that means is, yes, we can solve the technical problems for our customers. But we also work with them to get the most out of their technology. So we provide operational services that, make them more efficient and utilize that technology for the life of the satellite or the robotics or whatever it is that we've delivered. We also help our customers with their go-to-market strategy in terms of how they distribute their products or services. And finally, as mentioned earlier, we help our customers secure financing for their missions. So I'm not an engineer, and I spend most of my time working on the latter half, helping customers and internal teams put together their business plans, put together business cases, and secure financing for those missions. So the environment has definitely changed a lot, quite dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. So this is a very exciting topic for me, and I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion.
Thank you very much, and Pat. Now, Andrew, you have set up fairly recently a company that is investing in this sector. So I'd like to find out from you what your perspective is and why you guys did that.
Sure, Kirsten. Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the panel here tonight, and it's always fun to talk about the space sector and MDA in particular. It's a really great company to be involved with, to be honest. From my perspective, so Northern Private Capital, a growth equity investment firm. We usually invest, relatively small relative to MDA, smaller investments into earlier-ish stage companies. So we would know GHGSat and others, and Kepler and others like that in the Canadian landscape. But maybe I think it's worth just giving a little bit of perspective on why we think space is interesting and why it's kind of come into its own recently. If you roll the clock all the way back to when space started, or space exploration started in the 50s, it was really the purview only of the richest governments in the world. Smaller countries couldn't even afford to be in space, and Canada was, I think, the third country to go into space. And it stayed that way for about 40 years, where it was really too expensive for anybody except effectively governments to participate in R&D and space exploration. And then you had the satellite industry start to grow up. So you had commercial satellites that went into space, but those satellites were generally going into geostationary orbit. They were hundreds of millions of dollars. They took years to build, and you had to have a very sizable cash balance to really get into that game at all. And in the last decade, there's been a really dramatic change where all the costs associated with delivering businesses, space-based business activities have come way down. So the commercial launch industry has really developed in the last decade and has taken the cost of launch down by 10x. From order of magnitude $20,000 per kilogram to get something into space to $2,000 per kilogram, and it's on its way to sub $1,000 per kilogram. And at the same time, all those miniaturization technologies and improvements in semiconductor capabilities and things such as that have made the sensors that go into space, whether they're for communication purposes or observation purposes, vastly cheaper to build and vastly smaller. And so now the capability of something you can put in space and the cost to get it up there is a fraction of what it used to be. And that has opened the door for people to launch space businesses with a budget of $10 million or $50 million and not $10 billion or $500 million. And that's really allowed for venture capitalists and growth equity investors and private equity investors to start to really evaluate this market. And I think that, as much as anything, has really opened the door to a lot more private investment in space, because it's in manageable bites that you can launch a business. And so we see that as that allowed us to sort of become interested in space. But it's also powering a huge amount of capital coming to the market. As mentioned before, hundreds of billions now of private capital flowed into the market. And that is, that's going to translate into more activity and more things that need to be built and more businesses that are going to be delivered. And, MDA is one of the big beneficiaries of a lot of that, because, we see a lot of those dollars are being put towards constellations or products that, that we have that MDA has the expertise in building. So that really informs our enthusiasm for that. But I just think I wanted to make the point that, broadly defined, I think the market is now very approachable for private capital when it really wasn't just a decade ago.
That's a really interesting perspective, and it's something that we heard at our last event when we were talking with Kepler Communications and GHG Set, that spectacular drop in launch cost. It's pretty incredible. Now, I know there's a lot of people on this event tonight that probably know more detail about why the launch costs have dropped, but is it really because there have been more people doing it? Is it just an economy of scale and miniaturization, or are there other forces that are making that happen? Does anybody want to take that one on? That's a question I just made up. Sorry, you didn't get that in advance.
No, I can maybe give a start. And definitely, I think the main drivers, as per earlier mentioned, is the access to space significantly drop. And I think, first of all, foremost, we need to credit SpaceX for that, for pushing the boundary in reusable flights and, really bringing down the costs down. And I think others are, based on that and seeing the experience following that pattern and helping to remain and pushing the barrier on that level. And I think miniaturization obviously is one of the key things that allows us to build and things cheaper, but it's also a little bit of a mindset, I think, that from, as pointed out earlier, when you have government contracts, you build something custom made, needs to be super reliable, the mindset and build, and, you're very capable engineers at building the perfect machines, and kind of building this perfect is kind of moved away and addressing commercial markets, different type of clients, and working towards more like a spiral development that you build something, you improve over time, is a completely different mindset that kind of come into this in the space sector, and that comes now at different levels of the ecosystem. So I think it really, it's not only private capital, it's not only miniaturization, it's not only access, it's really changing this mindset, I think, at multiple different levels that really help to transform this industry.
Yeah, just adding to that, the barriers to entry have dropped dramatically, and the ability to come up with viable business cases, both in terms of being able to deliver new solutions at much lower cost points, and the ability to raise capital to support those business cases has also accelerated. So it's you get both sides of it. You get significant reductions in cost and far more capital available to support business cases.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. I mean, I've been following this industry for decades, and it's it seems to just be blossoming now, and it's amazing to watch. Do you think that this type of investment has changed the perception of the domestic space industry? Anybody want to take that on? Like from a public perspective, do you think people know that this is going on? You got to. I know we've got a lot of people here tonight who know that's going on. They're really excited. But I mean, from a public perspective, yes, but also from a business perspective, do you think people are thinking about maybe using more space-based resources as they develop business plans for industries that were not traditionally connected with space?
Yeah, I think I do so, right? Obviously, there's much more media coverage, even mainstream media coverage of the space sector, but it's also one of the areas where I think we can still make a lot of progress, to be fairly honest. And I think there's a number of we can talk a little bit more in detail, but in Earth observation, there's a lot of line of use cases that still needs to develop, and that requires integration of all the other industries. So we really need to do that and break more and more of those kind of barriers and silos that maybe historically existed. So. I think, definitely well on track compared to a few years ago. But I think because again, there's a lot of money spent right now. You see some exits and some progress, but obviously, to really, basically meet the expectations of investors, there's still a lot to happen. And I think some of the things that space, a lot of people look at space, it's happening in space, but there's no ecosystem around on the ground developing the services, developing the AI kind of and analytics products around it. There's still a lot of work, I think, in that area. That obviously you need the investments initially to build the capability in space, but then to derive the value. And if you look at the space economy, right, the value creation, the big billion-dollar value creation is at the end used on Earth, right? So that's where the value is of the space economy, where the money is made, and that requires tight integration with other industries and sectors to make a better use of space and scale up the use of space products.
A better use of space. I like that. It's like better homes and gardens, better space. Andrew, you've given a little bit of an introduction to this already, but you mentioned the relationship Northern Private Capital and MDA. What attracted you to that? And the as people may know, MDA is now a publicly traded company. So what attracted you initially to that?
So good question. And just to make sure it's crystal clear, we're a publicly traded company, so I cannot make any forward-looking statements. I just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
If one even sounds like I'm looking forward, please disregard it.
Let's talk about your original discussion about why you did that and stay on safe ground. Yes.
So listen, what we saw a company that's just really, really well positioned to capitalize on all these trends that we've started to talk about. So they've got a real leadership position across a couple of different markets in specific to geointelligence and in radar satellites, which is a particular type of imagery that's actually quite useful and quite unique and quite differentiated from optical or the pictures that you would see in the paper or everywhere else from satellite. They have what I would suggest is a world-leading position in space robotics by virtue of their experience building Canadarms for the space shuttle and then on for the ISS, the International Space Station, and then also a world-leading position in terms of antenna technology and other payloads for communication satellites. So those, and they have other expertise, but just big picture, those three areas. They have tremendous leadership positions and great IP, great tech, great engineering talent inside the company, which is hard to gather together. And we just felt that there was this great opportunity to have this company be a standalone company again, bring it back to Canada, and it was going to benefit from sort of the overall industry tailwinds that we've been talking about, but also a renewed commitment by the Canadian government, I believe, to really sort of reestablish a leadership position in terms of space activity and space investment. And we thought the company would benefit from that as well. So we just thought we thought we were getting a chance to invest in a really high quality growth business with great IP. And then as investors at a very reasonable price. And that's not easy to find, especially these days. I mean, I would say that the, valuations now, just since we invested in MDA have really increased, because while the general public may not have completely embraced space yet as an investment area, there's no question private equity and the market, and to some degree the public markets have started to. And so there's a real awareness that this is a really big growth trend that people want exposure to. Mm-hmm. And so we're happy about that. I think I think that's going to play out over the next decade or decades as this industry really comes into its own.
Thank you. It's a great story. And Pat, in your opinion, the impact on going public on MDA's sort of the supply chain that you rely on and the whole space ecosystem in Canada. I mean, being that you're the sort of big company, has that kickstarted a bunch of other things going on down the line for MDA?
I definitely think it's had a positive impact on the sector. I mean, anytime like a major anchor company in an industry has a success, everybody else kind of benefits from that success. It brings attention to the sector. It means, for other investors that this is a viable sector that they should be looking at. And so, yes, I definitely think that MDA's success will have a bigger benefit to the broader space ecosystem in Canada, for sure.
Great. Yeah, well, it certainly seems that way. I don't know if anybody watching tonight is perhaps a recent graduate or, a student who's thinking about going into aerospace, but maybe I'll just throw this question out to everybody. If you have advice for people who are looking towards a career in aerospace, is there anything you might say to them about staying in Canada and not maybe doing the traditional move down to Cape Canaveral or perhaps to the Cité de l'Espace in France or wherever? What kind of opportunities are there right now?
Well, I'd love to
go for it. You're going to get resumes in the mail tomorrow.
If this was the 1960s and everybody was racing off for the mission to the moon, you'd be jumping on it, right? And now we're in a situation where not only are governments racing to get to the moon, but you've got commercial organizations racing to get to the moon and beyond, going to Mars. There's this whole commercial ecosystem that's growing and being funded. So there's going to be demands for people of all different types, right? Like in terms of, it's not just engineers that are needed, but there's, economists that are needed. There's all sorts of, business and humanities and HR and people that are needed across the entire industry. So it's not just an engineering profession. There's tremendous opportunity for, for people of all backgrounds.
I would just add to that. I mean, we've been really amazed at how much intellectual property there is just at MDA alone around space. And for somebody coming out of school, the opportunity to work on what will be the first AI, the first robotic piece of equipment using AI in space, that will be our Canadarm on the Lunar Gateway, which will be a space station revolving around the moon. It's hard to find a cooler project to work on than that. And if you think about some of the antenna technology that MDA is building, it is world leading, and I think you're going to see a digitization of all payloads on all satellites. And there's a core of technology there that some of the most interesting projects are being worked on right here in Canada. So I think there's a great ecosystem developing that there's a basis for it, and I think it's going to grow. So I think you'd be putting yourself in a very good position staying in Canada and working in MDA or working at another Canadian space company. I think it's a very, very, very positive environment to start a career.
So email addresses to send resumes, we'll publish them tomorrow, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, check out the MDA website. Lots of jobs.
There are lots of jobs there too. Sorry, Nathan, what were you going to ask?
Yeah, no. I think that all kind of have been said. I think the only and I definitely we need more wider diversified skill set. But I think from an engineering perspective as well, when some of the discussions I had, previously an engineer would maybe work 10 years or something on a project, and I think now we're at a time that you building Canada are free, but then few years later there will be the next big thing, right? So I think it's a really interesting time that it's not going to be your one lifetime kind of accomplishment, but it will be multiple engineering kind of master pieces that you can work, help, and build. So that makes it, I think, very exciting for that perspective.
Really interesting point. Those old, I shouldn't say old, but the missions that are still going, Voyager and all those things, people have been working on them for their entire career. And you could still do that, I suppose, but there's so much more going on now. We're getting a lot of comments in already from our people on the YouTube channel. If you're watching and want to ask a question, you do have to be logged into YouTube. If you don't want to do that, you could also send a tweet to our Space Place Canada Twitter, which I'm just going to put that up there. If you're not on Twitter, you could try old school on email, info@spaceplacecanada.ca. Nathan, I wanted to pick up actually on this conversation about Canada being a spot for this. So Euroconsult's a global company. You've got clients all over the world. So what does your company want to be in Canada? I mean, I think we've already gone over this a little bit, but if you have any other perspectives on that, and how we stack up to some of the other countries that you're active in.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, so a global company, we're actually have local presence, of offices in eight different locations, 8 different countries, and we have a lot of representatives. So obviously, this business is very global and international. Why we choose Canada? The point, actually, if you look at how much Canada invests in space, I think it's from a government perspective, it's the 13 largest kind of country. So it would not necessarily make the top. But again, there's also countries like China and Russia that might be a bit different to look at. But for us, at the end, I think it was also partly the pool of talent that we could access and set up. We had, and I think one of the things with the pandemic, you realize though, there's two things. You can do a lot of business global, but then local presence, stay as you cannot travel, you're closer to your clients. So it's kind of a funny thing that we looked at, when we are revisiting kind of, last year during the pandemic, we do see that actually business from our local kind of presence increased, where international business was actually a bit lower. So you do, I think, see and value kind of the local presence to stay close to your customers. So, but again, in general, I think Canada is it's a great place for it's the other big advantage of Canada is we're a bit impartial, right? So it opens doors in many countries. So doing business in the Middle East, doing business in Asia, Canadians are typically seen as very resourceful, but also very kind of good people to work with. So I think that helps as well to doing international business, and I think that's one of the key features of Canadian companies doing global business. It's good to have a Canadian flag.
Oh, it's always nice to hear that that's still true. It was when I was traveling through Europe as a student. It's nice to still know. Andrew, I have a question for you. You've already told us about why you were attracted to MDA. How does MDA fit in with the other kinds of companies that your firm is involved in investing with? So we've seen the sort of reach that space could have. Are you finding that there is a sort of broader interest in tapping into that with the other companies that you're investing in?
Sure. So I'd maybe answer that in two ways. So we are generalist investors at Northern Private Capital. We're not a space-focused private equity fund. And so we look at different businesses with different, different end markets, hopefully with as exciting trends as MDA enjoys being in the space sector. So those would be, if we're in a different sector, that would be unrelated. However, I would say that as a result of investing in MDA, we are that much more plugged into the investment world and investment opportunities in space. And so, obviously anything we see that would fit, that would be a strategic fit for MDA, we would pass right along to MDA, and Pat would probably see it before I did anyway. But if we do definitely look at a variety of sort of space-based business opportunities that don't compete or touch where MDA is in the space, and we pay very close attention to them, because I think the same trends we believe in are empowering some of those business cases and making it possible to deliver services from space that you wouldn't have been able to deliver 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so we're trying to be very open-minded and very inquisitive around all that, and we're looking, we're doing due diligence on the company right now that's got a space-based business model to deliver a type of communication service.
Cool. So it is there. So I mean, that's something that struck me personally is the industries that are being now served by space-based technology that haven't been served by them before. I mean, we know RadarSat certainly has had a long history with agriculture. I learned that a long time ago. I don't know how broadly known that is, but what do you think the weirdest industry that has been connected to space-based technology recently is? As a bit of a poser for you, something a little out of left field. I know we heard a lot about the ships. MDA was doing something with ships, and I can't remember specifically what it was right now, but I think it was monitoring shipping lanes or something, and it was quite different. Any other weird connections that you've seen?
I'd say there's a lot of innovative new ideas that are coming forward, trying to utilize the benefits of space for new applications. And whether that's trying to overcome some of the limitations of terrestrial networks, whether that's in how you distribute, like, quantum keys for quantum key encryption, right? That's a new application. It's early stages, CSA is working on programs, ESA is working on programs. It's in the early stages. So that's, one of the more novel things. You're looking at people trying to do a lot of things like storing data in space, or high frequency trading using space assets because it's faster than doing it by fiber. There's a whole bunch of new applications that are coming out. There's literally hundreds of different constellations that are in work right now, various stages of funding. So yeah, there is a lot of different applications, whether it's sensing from space in terms of observation, or collecting data from IoT sensors, or how you apply that information to solve new problems for customers. So lots of unique things going on.
That's a better way of saying it than weird. Yes. Thank you. Do you think there's going to be a knock-on effect from this investment in space to other related technologies? So we have all this new ideas coming up, going to generate investment in other areas.
Yeah, well,
related?
People talk always about, some of the spin-off potential of space technologies, right? And definitely, I think MDA probably have seen these kind of things with the work they've done in the robotics that can be, used or applied into, medical or other kind of industry. So definitely there's always this potential, and, space technologies often are kind of in the forefront of some of the developments that then can enable other new applications and other type of industries, and something that even maybe for some of them here on the on the feature, on the live feature day, even using, a lot of people have the smartwatch or a Fitbit, it's GPS enabled, so it's something that space at the end enables as well to work. So there's definitely, I think that's always with space where we are today, and it's a lot of it, the remote sensing, what Pat related to. I think, you see this tremendous amount of data. We're building kind of the analytics capabilities around it. What are the use cases for it? It's still kind of in the developing phase. And I think there will be, people are looking and exploring and testing. And, probably our kind of expectation is that in 10 years from now, we'll talk about, this new application or new use for it that we all find very common, but we probably didn't think about today, which is the same what probably 10 years ago, nobody would tell you that a smartwatch would be, available and something of a wide use around, or Fitbits will be a wide around use today. So again, I think there's this potential that people currently are developing and working out, and I think we'll see that those use cases coming.
And I think an important aspect of that too is that, when you think about GPS and how it's being used, it's like seamless. People don't know that they're getting their information from space. Space is being utilized as part of the delivery of a service that, the customer cares about solving some problem. The fact that you're utilizing space assets to solve it, they really don't care about that too much. It's all about solving their problem. And I think where space is going to really take off is when it becomes more and more mainstream and integrated into more and more terrestrial solutions. People don't know that they're using space. Space just happens to be the most efficient way to solve a problem. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. And as people unlock the power of miniaturization and lower cost to access space, and they're putting up new constellations or new solutions that leverage these capabilities, you're going to see a lot more demand. But you're never really going to be like, oh, this is space driven by space. It's just going to be, I've got a problem that's solved that happens to utilize space assets.
Right. So when I dial up maps on my phone, for example, I don't think about the satellites. Sorry, Andrew. Yep.
I was just going to say, I think one of the good news stories from space that people sort of know is coming, but I think it's still going to surprise people a little bit, is people talk about the digital divide and the lack of connectivity for lots of communities around the world. Like we are single digit years away from the most remote communities on Earth having the best bandwidth of anybody going, because all of these constellations, they go over the world, uniformly. And when they're, floating over northern Canada, there's not a lot of people who are pulling on the bandwidth. So there's going to be a massive amount of capacity available up there in a very short amount of time. And I think that's going to just create a lot of equality for people around the world that, is going to be a benefit that no one really talks about yet. But I think that's a very nice, there'll be a nice knock-on effects of that, I think, that will transpire. It'll be a good news story for quite a while.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it is, as you say, it's coming very, very soon. So Andrew, you alluded to this earlier, and I think that what you're talking about with northern connectivity and everything is similar. It's going down the same path. Government spending is still, in a sense, driving the space sector. Is that a true thing to say? So if we hadn't committed to Lunar Gateway, would we be in this situation in Canada, do you think?
I'd say yes and no. I think that there's now a very material amount of commercial spending going on that's powered by very profitable business cases. And so there is a profit incentive. It is not a do-good incentive, or it's not a national security or national interest incentive for a big chunk of space. I would say, though, there are still big segments of space that are going to be carried by government spending for a long time. I mean, when you think about deep space exploration, there's not a big return on your investment for going to Mars anytime soon. Yeah. And so that's going to require, and I think governments are very interested in it, but that's going to require government, whatever you want to call it, subsidy support, involvement for a long time. And then that, I think if you take a long view on it, the satellite communication investments by governments in the 50s and 60s created a business that then became commercialized. I think we now have two tracks, because I think commercial spending is begetting commercial spending and commercial R&D, but I still think there are parts of space that are very much reliant on, sort of the enthusiasm of governments to do R&D, to do exploration, to really push the boundaries of, mankind, to be a little cheesy about it, but it's real.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. It's interesting to see also new countries weighed in. Nathan, did you have a comment on that?
I just want to maybe follow up on that. And I think it's true, and I think actually governments will play a crucial role in, for example, the connectivity, what we just touched on, which is maybe more commercialized. But two things about it. One, what I do think is a very positive trend, for example, if you look at the Telesat constellation, where the government of Canada becomes an anchor customer. So not necessarily funding the constellation by itself, but becoming an anchor customer and user of the satellite capacity, would bring connectivity to the north, right? Which is, I think, a general benefit for the country, but also help Telesat, for example, to have anchor customers when they get to financing, Andrew and the likes. They will look at, what kind of customers do you have? And obviously having a government is, the type A class government client that you can have, right? So it helps them as well in pushing the project forward, finding, financing for their project. So it's a very important kind of anchor commitment that the customer can give. And we talk about bridging the digital divide. And then again, it becomes about, getting to places where there's no connectivity. So the government still has to play that role, because it's still very difficult to afford bringing connectivity in these places, because the affordability levels are quite different, and still, even although the cost of satellite capacity and will go down, and satellite communication still, helping those kind of let's say remote villages being connected still either requires a government mandate for telcos to push them into and use satellite capacity and build out those networks, and also just helping and developing the infrastructure and building out a network altogether. So yeah, the role of government, I think, is changing very much in many sectors, and I think that's a positive thing. But the government will always, in my view, would always remain a crucial part of the ecosystem.
Right. So we're a spacefaring nation then, and we will remain that. We've had a lot of questions coming in, so I'd like to turn to them now. We have Ashley, who I think is in London, England, possibly, who's interested to know if any of you could comment on the potential of a launch industry in Canada. We've heard about the spaceport that people are talking about in Cape Breton. Is this something that people are actually talking about? Is this something you know anything about and can comment on?
Yeah, sure. No, I can comment it on, and I think we've it is very interesting. I think we've looked a lot at different spaceports within the company and a different kind of location. I never really specifically looked at Canada, and there's always a lot of interest. I think the launch business by itself is not a very profitable business, so it's a difficult kind of thing to pull off. But there are, I think, from the locations that we're currently looking, there are some advantages to have a local spaceport in Canada. On the flip side, there's so many developments that I think that's good what the government of Canada did. They said, okay, we invest in the Canada Arm 3. This is our major ticket, because as a Canadian, we cannot do everything. So we need to specialize and align our investments, I think, in the areas where we are strongest at. So whether the spaceport, I mean, I'm not necessarily against it, but I just have some doubts whether there's much of a real value add, and maybe there's D&D, or there's some, sometimes there's some, let's say, sovereign considerations to have like a domestic launch capability or launch kind of facility. But I would at this point also say, if there's many other international spaceports that can bring kind of the same capability, it's something that could be sufficient for where it stands today.
Kirsten, I can add to that. So I think there's probably some, maybe not confusion, but it's worth explaining that a spaceport is not like an airport where you can just set up a tarmac and a terminal and any plane can land there. It's very specialized, and for the larger rockets, you need very specific infrastructure for those rockets to launch from there, and they're all different. So you can't just pull up a Blue Origin rocket one day and pull up a SpaceX rocket the next day. You need the fueling equipment, you need the storage, you need the launch infrastructure to do that. And so a spaceport needs a launch partner or two or three ahead of time to make sure that they're going to have volume of activity at that spaceport. And so I think that Canada actually has in the east coast of Canada some interesting locations to do sun-synchronous launches, because the eastern part of Canada arches out over the Atlantic Ocean, and so you can launch, and there's not much in front of you other than Bermuda at some point to be worried about in terms of what would be in your way when you launch if there was a failure. And you'd note that all the U.S. launch sites are all on the coast, because they do just that. They launch out over the ocean for safety reasons. So I think it's an interesting idea, but I sort of agree that it's not something Canada needs to have to be to advance their interests in space, and it is very dependent on having the right launch vehicle partner to really make a really exciting business case.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for addressing that. There was a lot of people are interested in it by the comments on this side here. Thinking now more about what you were, I think all of you mentioned about the sort of pipeline of talent that Canada has. Do you think that there is any specific area where Canada needs to invest or consider beefing up in its training for people going into the space industry? So Pat, you were talking about all the different types of job that you can do in the space industry, but is there any specific type of training that you would recommend that we might want to see more of? Again, I think we may have some potential students in the audience who are looking at what they should be concentrating on if they want to get a job in this industry.
So, absolutely. So, there's a number of areas that are in the early stages adoption within the space industry, and you're seeing more and more use of AI and machine learning, not just in the analytics of satellite imagery, but in how you manufacture, how you operate robotics. I think there's going to be a huge demand for people who have that sort of a skill set. I think you're also going to see a transition in terms of the types of missions that are being performed and types of services that are aligned with those missions. And so it's going to, traditionally, the space sector has been very focused on building really complex technical hardware and then launching it into space and then operating it for a very, specific purpose. And it might be delivering imagery. And I think the space industry will evolve and people will move more and more towards a market orientation, which means there's going to be gaps in terms of understanding what the ultimate customer problem is or market problem is that needs to be solved, and working backwards from the problem to better understand how you can apply space technology to solve those problems. So I think there's another skill set that's desperately needed in the space industry, which is more along the lines of that almost like product management, that I think there's going to be great opportunities there. And then, of course, there's all sorts of requirements for what you do with data that comes off of the satellites, whether it's IoT data, whether it's EO data, like the whole analytics side is going to grow tremendously. So lots of opportunities in those areas.
So really interesting points. Related to that, we had a question about manufacturing relating to space in Canada. So actually building stuff here, is that something that we see going on a lot? And if so, is that got a future, or are we going to be building stuff elsewhere and then bringing it here to perfect or refine, or what do you think?
Well, from my perspective, absolutely. Canada is a great home for manufacturing space hardware. And if you look at the type of work that we do in all of our facilities, but particularly in Montreal, where we build a lot of satellite subsystems, whether it's payloads or antennas or electronics. In fact, the way the industry is changing right now, it's moving more towards volume production, because we've gone from very expensive one-off geos to building constellations, and so there's building constellations takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of people to build the subsystems, and especially takes a lot of people for doing the assembly, integration, and test of those satellites. So lots of opportunities, and then you also get not only the big Canadarm3 program or programs like that, where you're building, one-offs for a large complex system, but it's the spin-off of that technology and the commercialization of that technology that creates new opportunities for other manufacturing programs. So lots of opportunity to support manufacturing in Canada.
Yeah,
it's good to know.
Beside MDA, right? There's Kepler. I think they're also building their satellites in-house.
Downtown Toronto. Right.
So here you go.
Yeah.
And Telesat is planning, when they get fully financed and up and running, to have a plan in Quebec, so that they will build the satellites, and a large part of the satellites as well. And MDA will supply some of that as well. So there's definitely, in terms of manufacturing capabilities, there are requirements. It's quite substantial, especially in the coming years. There seems to be a big boom in building satellites in Canada.
Okay. So Andrew Henry has a question about regulatory issues in the finance industry that affect Canadian space technology, or funding, trying to invest in Earth science firms. Is there any regulatory issues that have a habit of holding these things up, or is it relatively smooth sailing?
So I might turn that question over to Pat to just talk a little bit about some of the restrictions in the U.S. for some sensitive technologies, because those would be the ones that may be relevant here. But in terms of in Canada, no, there are not, to my knowledge, any really significant regulatory hurdles that obstruct investment in Canadian space. In fact, there's a lot of support from different Canadian governments that are funding big and small companies. So various programs like SDTC or SIF or a few others where, you know, the Ministry of Innovation is really pretty interested in trying to find ways to push Canadian technologies forward. So I would say it's pretty supportive would be my general view. And then in terms of regulatory risks or issues, that's more a U.S. matter, and it actually is a reason why hopefully people would choose to build things in Canada so as to avoid some of these ITAR restrictions and other restrictions that are related to stuff, the technology that's developed in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. That's actually what I was thinking about. It's good news about the financial regulatory environment being favorable, but if you are doing things that are sensitive, we know that that's a big part of the U.S. Space industry. So, Pat, do you have anything to say about that?
So this has been a barrier, you know, for not just for the space industry, but the defense industry as well. Right? So, but there's lots of Canadian defense companies that have supported U.S. defense programs over the years. There's special, you know, treaties between Canada and the U.S. that allow Canada to participate in those programs, and even for some of the you know, classified programs or other programs, you're able to sell COTS products or, you know, build to print type solutions into the U.S. Where you are just building to a spec. You've got a design, you've got drawings, you're delivering that to your customer, or you're delivering a standard product. And so there are ways that you can participate in those programs. You can also set up special security measures and ways that you can, you know, advance your security status in the U.S. But, you know, really, you know, we're seeing lots of opportunities to support programs in terms of providing, you know, products. You're not getting into details of what the specific program might involve, but we know we can sell an off-the-shelf product or a build-to-print solution into those customers.
Okay, well, that's it would strike me as something that has also changed a little bit is the reliance on the defense industry for space. Now that we've got lots of commercial applications, we don't have to worry about that quite so much. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely. I mean, there's certainly growing defense interest when you look at what's going on with the SDA programs and the build out of constellations there. But there's lots of commercial opportunities for sure. I don't know if Nathan wants to add to that.
Yeah, no, actually, it's a good point. So, you know, I think we've, over the last 10 years, I think we've seen, you know, more civil and commercial kind of activity. But actually, one of the things that we know in our projections that the militarization of space and, you know, the interest of defense agencies going forward will kind of increase the spending. And we see already a number of programs that are quite well and advanced. On the communication side, but also on observation and other type of geointelligence programs. So yeah, and there's a lot of other activities actually around that. So defense, it's sometimes a little bit different, you know, animal to talk about, but yeah, definitely something that we see a growth interest and actually will drive a lot of the investments from the government side over the next decade.
Okay. So it hasn't changed all that much after all.
No, even the China-US kind of situation is something that drives even more right now on US kind of radar.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's really there's a really big growth opportunity in the US. I think less so. Obviously, it's not really available to us in China, and Canada is not. You're not going to see. I don't think a lot of military type investment or Defense Department investment in space in Canada. Although that is a portion of how they're thinking. But just for people's sort of general knowledge, the NASA budget is about $30 billion. The U.S. Department of Defense budget is about $800. So to the extent that you can get a little portion of the Defense Department budget dedicated to space, it is not an insignificant needle mover. It is a real needle mover for space spending in the U.S.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, talking about that, are there countries that Canada is working with besides the United States? We had a question specifically about perhaps countries in Africa or in Asia that we have projects with that you could talk about. Is that something that Canada does, or are our main partners typically the US?
Well, Canada is part of the ESA, European Space Agency, so there's definitely activity and partnerships around that. Just trying to think about. I mean, definitely, like I think there might have been some partnerships with like established space programs in Japan and Korea. Australia are these kind of countries, and I think in Africa obviously is one of an area where it's kind of more emerging. So I'm not sure there are too many activities done today, but one of the things that is pretty striking, to give you like as an example, if you look at, let's say 2000 there were like 30 countries investing or kind of government spending on space activities. Today we're at 85, right? So there you really see a huge increasing trend in the number of smaller countries or emerging countries as well focusing. And now and obviously there are very small scale kind of investments, as we earlier noted. If you look at the total investment, US dominates. 60% of total government spending comes from the US, right? So it's still a lot of the money comes from the top 5, but you do see this kind of longer tail of smaller countries as well taking part of this. So and that will definitely, I think, future-wise, will help them to start partnerships and working together, because again, especially in the space exploration side, it's a very, it's a partnerships mode that you need to work together to achieve the goals that you set. So these 5 partnerships is definitely what we could expect more of it going forward.
Yeah, and when you look at like what's going on with Artemis and the number of countries that are signing up, I think just last week or the week before, like New Zealand signed up and Brazil signed up. Like every month you seem to get another couple of countries that are signing up to join and participate in this mission. And all these countries that are decided to join the mission, there's going to be opportunities to collaborate between those countries as they try to solve common problems for the Artemis mission, and they each choose little bits and pieces that they want to work on. So lots of opportunity for international collaboration between Canada and other countries.
That's an interesting thing. I hadn't realized that was happening at that pace. But as Andrew was talking about the good news stories coming out of space, I think the potential for these things to improve international relations is always one that I have my eye on. We had another question about, here's one about 3D printing technology. And somebody mentioned that there was a company in Quebec that has a 3D printed hybrid rocket engine. Have you heard about any of this and its impact on the space industry? Another weird technology that we're all getting used to, or is this sort of just another thing on the edge of the just starting to come into its own?
So certainly 3D printing as part, MDA's worked with 3D printing both for like prototypes and early stage development, and it's definitely becoming a common part of production activities. It helps to reduce the lead time for, when you get into a production environment and you're looking at, things that could take you, weeks and weeks and weeks in your schedule. That you can reduce that to days or even less, certainly has a benefit to moving a lot quicker through the production cycle. So I think you're going to see more and more 3D printing as part of production activities. I'm not familiar with this company that was mentioned, but it certainly is in other parts of manufacturing. 3D printing is certainly becoming more commonplace.
It's actually a good example. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go first. Oh no, I just wanted to mention that I'm not so aware of the Quebec company, but 3D printing as well to build out a sustainable kind of lunar presence or moon exploration or Mars exploration. It's one of the key kind of technologies that helps us to build and advance that. So I think it's definitely something that's important in the space environment. So now, it's a kind of applied here with MDA or the satellite manufacturing on the ground. I mean, there's rockets as well that are planned to be 3D printed as well. So I think there's lots of opportunities around 3D printing, but I think it's one of the kind of corner pieces as well for future space exploration to have the 3D capabilities in space being available.
Yeah, that is very true. Actually, if you think about, if you can't bring stuff into space, you can't bring replacement parts into space. If you bring a 3D printer up there, you can print the part that you need to fix things once you're in space. But I was just going to say, I don't know the Montreal company, but there is one of the best funded launch companies is a company called Relativity Space in California, and their whole model is 3D printing rockets from scratch, and they've got some of the biggest metal printers, 3D metal printers in the world, printing some of these rockets. So it is certainly a use of that technology, and I'm sure there's a good one in Quebec too. I don't know of it.
A 3D printed rocket. I mean, it's just incredible. It's just amazing to see what's coming down. There was another question we had that I think all of you could take a stab at, which is the barriers to increasing the space industry in Canada. Is there anything specific that you might suggest to make it a more friendly place for it, or are we just all doing a great job? Are there any specific things that are, maybe causing difficulties that could be smoothed over a little bit? Maybe increasing networks, collaboration? I don't know if you have anything to comment on that.
I think there may be a few things. Always there can be, I think as you pointed out, kind of collaboration, and we've done as well these exercises with the CSA, for example, and looking at what surveying new space companies, so startups, what they are looking for from Canada, basically. And one of the key things that often comes around is actually two things, actually. One is for, let's say, more companies that are more downstream focused, less building hardware, to have, the government as an anchor customer. That really helps them, kind of already related it earlier. And the second point that often comes around is giving flight opportunities. So if you build, obviously, when you build space hardware, the challenge is really when you reach certain, RTRL development is to really test it and gain flight heritage. So providing flight opportunities for new hardware to startups or to kind of company really helps them to bring them further in the kind of development of their technologies, and then the end to develop a real products and services. So those are kind of always kind of the two main items I think that comes as feedback from, let's say, the new space industry. But there's other things, obviously, helping linking incubators, maybe superclusters, research centers, knowledge centers, making all integrating. And it comes back to our earlier point, right? We want to integrate space in a wider kind of ecosystem. And I think that's some of the areas where, everybody is kind of involved in and try to break and help and foster a little bit of collaboration among different industries and different sectors. So I think that's one of the kind of key elements, and there are some other parts, but those are kind of the three main points that where we still can improve. We're making good progress, but we can still improve.
It's not unique to space, I think.
Yeah,
no, exactly. It's very true. I mean, the other thing that people say is that obviously Canadian VC compared to US is less VC money available, but on the other hand, you see a lot of the Canadian companies have been able to attract US VC funding, or so I don't know. That's not necessarily different from any other industry, but the flight opportunity is something very specific to space, obviously, to get the flight heritage on the technologies.
Interesting. Yeah. Somebody else has mentioned the cost of getting data from some space-based data. So if you want to access some space-based data, it can still be a bit expensive. And they were curious whether or not those costs might be coming down anytime in the future. I'm not sure if this is something that there was a specific mention about getting data from RadarSat, for example. Is that something that you can comment on? As more of these go up, the price of the data will go down?
Yeah, so I guess just in general, in space, what we're seeing is that on the Earth observation side, that the business models are beginning to change. And so what was once, one person had a very exquisite satellite, and they were out selling data, and they would sell it by the image, and they would collect an image for a specific customer, and they would charge that customer the full amount of that image. And the customer would then use the image for their own purposes. And then relatively few other people would have interest in that specific interest, that specific image. And what you're seeing now is more and more satellite operators who are building constellations, and the model is shifting. It's moving away from selling a single image to providing what they'd like is persistent coverage. And so that you're not paying necessarily for the image, because the image is now being sold to many different people, or parts of that image are now being sold to many different people. And so it's a change in the model that will help reduce the cost of the end user, who might just be interested in ships out of that image, or a certain small part of that image. They're not interested in buying the whole thing. But because you've aggregated demand and are able to break up demand for that single image, you can now sell bits and pieces to individuals at a lower price point. And so across the industry, you're starting to see that. It hasn't really been fully adopted. I don't think anybody's doing it right now, because there's not a lot of persistent surveillance that's available right now. The industry is definitely moving in that direction.
Yeah, that's good news. And a lot of it is, a lot of things are available publicly, as you say, with GPS. Everybody's using that now. It's quite incredible. So that's anybody who wants to get a last minute question in, we're going to wrap up pretty soon. So if you want to put it in, try to put it in. Michael, I know you're trying and it hasn't come through. I'm sorry. Try again if you can. But as we sort of think about winding this down, I just want to leave the floor open for last comments. Andrew, I wanted to ask you, what's next on the horizon for Northern Private Capital? Have you got any big, interesting projects that may be related to space coming up?
Always working on interesting stuff.
I'm sure.
I'm always searching for the next great company like MDA that we can invest in.
Yeah.
But nothing I could talk about.
Discuss. I recommend everybody have a look at the website. It's got a lovely, actually both websites, the Northern Private Capital and Euroconsult, have beautiful satellites on your landing pages, which made me very jealous because I thought they'd be wonderful to have that. Nathan, how about you? Have you got any interesting things on the horizon?
I think, we already talked quite a bit today about, some of the, obviously MDA, Telesat, that, have very interesting kind of where they are today. And then just to highlight just a little bit on Telesat, is one of the most kind of ambitious kind of connectivity projects from a space perspective that they are undertaking. So, it's really taking Canada to, basically competing with the big guys from the US or other parts in the world. So it's pretty interesting to see and how Canada can play a role on that. There are other companies, right? So I think, and that's what I feel pretty positive about. We're not have all our eggs in one basket in Canada. There's a number of other companies. There's North Star, for example, looking at space situational awareness, which is kind of another kind of, we didn't talk about it today, but imagine all these satellites being launched, and increase on a number of debris in space that can create issues, and have already started to have near collisions of debris with space assets. So having built a system and that monitors and track and can help support managing kind of all the traffic that is out there in space, I think would be a tremendous capability. And North Star is one of the companies, a Canadian company in Montreal, that is working around solutions around that. I think you already had Kepler earlier on that also, has a different value proposition and different angle to the market. There's Mission Control Systems that is working on a rover. Rover will be launched, I think, fairly in the next few years. So there's a number of companies, I think, that are working on different parts of the Canadian space sector and the ecosystem that makes it pretty fascinating, I think, and that makes us pretty excited on where things stand today. So GHGSat, I think you already referred to them as well, a completely different angle to what you can do with space-based assets. So I think we can, as Canadians, be pretty proud on where we are today. Definitely, hope to see them flourish over the next decade and become, the next space unicorns. And, that would be
space unicorns.
Nice.
What an image! I'm going to get my daughter in here. Actually, there is an interesting question that's just come in. Considerations that you would have as a possible investor for an early stage space technology. So what kind of questions would you ask? You want to see a business plan? How are they going to make their money? Are there anything beyond the usual sorts of things that you would consider?
I guess I can take that one.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of companies out there that have a, if you build it, they will come philosophy. And they envision a giant market that they're going to serve, and they just have to build a constellation or build a certain type of satellite, and they'll sell that business. I think those are very hard to invest in because it's very hard to, without a real customer at a real price point who's prepared to actually buy the service and is already committed to it. It's hard to take a chance on putting something up there because, if you miss the use case by just a little bit, if the image is not exactly what they need for their particular purpose, or if it doesn't perform exactly the function that the end customer, it turns out, needs, it becomes very hard to sell that product. And so I think that, for businesses that are trying to develop new capabilities, I think making sure you have an anchor customer that's validating your business is critical. And then also, to the extent that the technology is novel, that's a high bar to clear to get comfortable that some new technology will work in space, because you don't get a lot of chances. If it doesn't work, it's very problematic if you send it up on the satellite and it doesn't work. And so those are two variables that I think are, sort of aspiring companies need to really think about. How do we de-risk those elements, the technology and the business case? That's just very high level. That's where we spend a lot of our time trying to understand the risk reward calculation that we're making.
Right. That makes complete sense. Unless you're the space telescope, you really don't get the chance to be prepared if you're up. Pat, I know that, MDA has a lot of interesting projects with Artemis and Canadarm3. And I'm just curious, what do you think those ones coming along, which one is your favorite? What do you think is the one that you're most excited about out of those?
You know what? There's a lot of really exciting things going on in space, and definitely, broadband connectivity. Because I live kind of north of Toronto, I certainly appreciate that, especially when you go to cottages and there's no, services that are available there. Internet service, that's definitely, a stepping stone. But to actually look up at the moon and know that there's stuff going on around the moon, that there's a gateway orbiting that moon with, autonomous robotics on it, that's really exciting. I mean, every time you look at the moon, you'll know that, there's humans up there, that we've built infrastructure up there. And eventually, if that leads to, building out communities on the moon, that'll be even more exciting. But for me right now, the first step, I really think getting to the moon, getting to lunar orbit, establishing that gateway, that's the really exciting thing for me in terms of the next step. But then after that, that just becomes a stepping stone for going down to the lunar surface or going to deep space exploration, or who knows what else you're going to do with infrastructure in deep space. Very exciting times.
Incredible stuff. Incredible stuff. Well, I would like to thank you all. Any closing remarks from anyone? We've covered a lot of ground from here to the moon and beyond.
So for me, it's an exciting time in space, and there's lots of great stuff going on at MDA right now. We are definitely ramping up our workforce. So for any of you students that are out there, or people who aspire to get involved in space, I would highly encourage you to check out our website. And if you see some interesting jobs, connect with us. We'd love to hear from you. There's lots of opportunities out there for people to participate in space in Canada.
Excellent. Well, I think that's something we've heard loud and clear this evening. So I would like to thank all of our panelists, Andrew, Nathan, and Pat. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And thank you to everybody who's joined us online. We appreciate all the questions and all the interesting commentary, a lot of networking going on in our comments tonight, which is really great because here we are all sitting in different places from all around the world, and we're all connecting over Canadian space. I think that is the very best story of all. So I'd like to thank everybody again for joining us, and we'll wish you a pleasant evening. And please keep an eye out on spaceplacecanada.ca. We also have all of our social media and our YouTube channel. So if you subscribe, you'll find out about future events. And if you can join our mailing list. You can find that at spaceplacecanada.ca, and you'll get email about all these wonderful events as well. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and have a pleasant evening.